Solitude today and solitude 200 years ago are two completely different things. 200 years ago, what we know as a sort of solitude in terms of a spiritual pursuit, a philosophical pursuit, or whatever it may be, was deeply embedded in there's no distractions and there's nothing else except for the self to examine and to witness, and most of all to observe. In that case, when we're left with nothing but the self to observe, we can see it sort of melt away and we're left with pure awareness, pure presence, which is pretty powerful. And we don't really need to create an explanation because when you're existing in pure presence without the accompanying thoughts and emotions that you usually struggle with, it's not that you have all the answers, it's that the questions have disappeared. You're satisfied in living in the present moment without having to know everything. But solitude now is often a completely different ball game because solitude now also involves the internet and the algorithm. So you're not truly alone. You're not truly taking the time in terms of a spiritual practice to examine the self. Rather, you're actually conditioning the self with whatever you're watching on the internet, whatever algorithm you're feeding, whatever the algorithm believes you're interested in. And the more you engage with it, the more it starts to just add building blocks to the ego and the self that you already embody. So the answer really isn't in the modern day isolation to that degree. Because if you're isolating with the accompanying social media algorithm that is sort of just supporting your already formed beliefs and whatever opinions you have are going to be supported in the algorithm. And when you're alone in that, that's a very dangerous place to be because suddenly your worldview isn't challenged by your peers. Suddenly your opinions don't have any pushback on them. And you start to believe that the way you see the world is the way the world is. And this is a big problem, especially today. People spend a lot of time alone and they'll say, I'm an introvert or I'm antisocial or I just like spending time by myself. But you're not really spending time by yourself because you're on the internet, you're engaging with content. This fills that part of your brain that would have been filled with socializing and community. And I think right now, especially in the modern times, it's a big problem because we're seeing perspectives being turned into sort of morally fact positions and we're having trouble communicating with each other because we're being warped into this sort of opinionated worldview that is only being supported by the algorithm. And when you have community, you can, even if they agree with you on a lot of things, you can have pushback. But more importantly than the outer opinions, it's the opinions you have about yourself as well. Because if you're constantly engaging with content that tells you a specific thing about the archetype of who you are, you're going to begin to believe that you are subject and limited to that archetype instead of being able to grow past those limitations and evolve into something that is different and something that is beyond those perceptions. So I would be very careful when we start to frame solitude in a way that is not also a sort of obsessive comfort that comes from not having to interact with, all different types of people and walks of life. I would tell you that if you are looking to evolve, if you are looking to come into your highest alignment, it's not going to be found sitting in your room watching content. And that's just the truth of the matter. And it's comes back to the same thing that I say over and over again is if you stay in your comfort zone, that comfort zone is going to become a prison. It's going to become a trap and it's going to hurt you over time because you're going to be sensitive to every little thing, every little opposing worldview, every sort of bias that you have that starts to crumble is a much more exaggerated when you only spend time with yourself. But if you're constantly being challenged, if your mind is constantly having to adapt to new experiences and new environments, then you're forced out of that anxious little comfort zone and you're forced into making the broader environments of the world your comfort zone. Your zone of tolerance for anxiety and discomfort actually expand. And when you spend too much time alone, especially when strictly accompanied by the internet, that zone of tolerance for discomfort and anxiety grows smaller and smaller until all that you're left with is really just one safe, quote unquote, safe room that you are basically trapped in. Because you might, go out for lunch or a grocery store. Let's say, in that case, someone anxiety is really bad. Then they come back to their room and they say, okay, I'm safe here. But that's not how it works because you're not truly, what are you truly safe from? The imaginary worries, the imaginary anxieties of what you think is going to happen, the discomfort that you're avoiding. You're not truly safe from anything. You're looking for a safety from your own mind, from your own self. And if you think that you have that, when you're sitting alone in your room, you don't. It's building under the surface. The only way to actually be free, to feel relaxed in life, is to run towards those discomforts. If you feel as though you're antisocial, the only way out of that antisocialness is to be social. It's to force yourself into a growing degree of environments that push you past your limits. And a lot of people, especially in the philosophical and spiritual community, they like to grow within the comforts of avenues they already have explored. So they like to debate philosophies and psychologies and the best way to go about life from the comfort of their room in which they are honestly a prisoner to. But the truest embodiment of any of those philosophies and psychologies is the one in which you can actually live. You can't take advice from someone who hasn't even overcome their own vices, from someone who hasn't even gone past the comfort of, frankly, their room or their home or whatever it is. Is the answer to lose yourself in interpersonal connections and to the point where you don't really know who you are and what you bring as a sort of individual? No, of course not. But you will find that alone time finds you. Solitude will find you when the time is sort of aligned. You'll have these sort of moments where you're reflecting when you were truly living in the present moment, and you'll say, wow, that went by fast, but I was having a good time, and now I need to sort of reset. I need to recharge. I need to reflect. That's what it is. You should be craving the solitude after a while. You shouldn't find comfort in it. The solitude is like a breath of fresh air. Solitude is like hydrating. Actually, it's not like a breath of fresh air because you can't have too much fresh air, but you can overhydrate. And that's the exact example that I would give. It's a good thing until it's abused. And when we pair that abusing of isolation with a social media network that is completely fueled in an algorithm that is completely created to sort of support the ideas and beliefs that you already have about yourself, it becomes a very sort of deep hole that we could fall into, and climbing out of it seems impossible. But truly climbing out of it is just ripping the band-aid off. There's no sort of satisfaction to your brain from these sort of internet engagements and the sort of way that you consume content. It's fulfilling the part of your brain that would have been entertained and fulfilled with socialization, and it's sort of numbing it. It's giving it just enough to sort of stay active. And that's why isolation in terms of without the internet, maybe just with a book or meditating or being in nature, that's a different ball game because now you've given no option to your mind. You're not feeding it and numbing it. You're basically just turning that little part of your brain off for a little bit. And that offness, that reset can be good. And that's why solitude and isolation has been praised so many times through historical texts and old spiritual documents and all these sort of teachings, because it used to mean something different. It didn't mean this sort of weird cons- constructed us and the algorithm time that we're living in now. You need to be challenged. And even if you are by yourself without these internet sort of portals that we throw ourselves into, the mind will sort of begin to challenge itself and its own views when not met with constant confirmed biases. So, socialization isn't the answer to all of our problems, but certainly isolation, when met with, an overuse of screen time, is the opposite effect. It doesn't give us that sort of satisfaction that we're craving, because what we're craving is real personal experiences. And that can't be found from the comfort of our room. And that choice, that ripping of the band aid, that's something that some people do and some people don't. And that's the difference between people who live with regret and people who don't. It's the sort of brutal and uncomfortable truth, but only when you tell yourself things you don't want to hear, only when you do things you don't feel like doing, can you truly grow and can you truly find satisfaction in life.